It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe, Friday, April 26th. Sam Park is in Los Angeles. I am in Colorado Springs, Colorado. U.S. aid to Ukraine clears both houses of Congress, and Defense Secretary Austin announces $6 billion specifically today. Secretary of State Antony Blinken takes in a basketball game while he's touring China. Apparent de-escalation between Iran and Israel, and power to the Volk, Sam. United Auto Workers get the Volkswagen hourly workers to vote to unionize. So that's pretty exciting.
Yes, it is.
I don't often go out of my way to invoke your former Columbia classmate, Brett Kavanaugh. But Sam, I like beer. I've already called a baseball game plus 3 extra innings of a continued game today. And yet I have delayed having my beer after hours of talking because I like to keep a sober mind as we discuss these important issues on Working for Crusoe.
I'm sorry to tell you, John, that my Columbia classmate who now serves on the Supreme Court is Neil Gorsuch.
Oh, shoot. I was so happy to bring up Kavanaugh because he loves beer.
Gorsuch might also like beer. I cannot confirm or deny any such taste that he might have.
See, this is why you're a better man than me. You don't go out of your way to name drop your former Columbia classmate who is on the Supreme Court. And so I had just decided it was Kavanaugh. That's a credit to your character.
If you say so.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with the more serious Iran-Israel apparent de-escalation. Can we qualify it as this?
Oh, sure. I think it's very obviously a de-escalation.
So Israel struck back, and we taped late Thursday. It was already Friday in the Middle East when Israel had struck with drones or missiles, depending on who you spoke to.
Yeah, but just as the news was breaking at that.
Yeah, there were reports of explosions in Isfahan, I believe, is the Iranian city.
Yes, that's correct.
Where the attack was, and we weren't sure if that would be it, if it would be so limited in scope, and in fact, it turned out to be. And Israel never even took credit for it. There's reporting in The Economist very recently, I don't know if you saw this, but Iran, in an attempt to kind of tamp the whole thing down, just swapped out the equipment that had been damaged with an undamaged unit of the same make. And they're like, it wasn't a big deal. So Israel isn't saying they did it, and Iran isn't really saying that it hurt them too bad. And it seems as though cooler heads have prevailed.
Yes. And in fact, as you mentioned, not only has Israel not taken credit for it, but we still don't know exactly what sorts of weapons were used in this attack.
Right. There's conflicting reports, drones, missiles.
Right. Exactly. But no one's actually said for certain. Whereas in the Iranian attack on Israel, we've got a detailed breakdown of exactly what weapons were used and how many of each kind. So the contrast, I think, is very stark. As it happened, NBC, I believe, had already scheduled a interview with the Iranian foreign minister, Abdullahian, and for the following day. And he was trying to talk tough, and he said, these weapons were just like, and this is almost a direct quote, toys that our children play with. Now, I don't think that's true. And in fact, I think that the foreign minister might owe his population an apology, because I can't believe for a moment that Iranians are such bad parents that they would allow their children to play with high explosives that might necessitate the activation of the Iranian air defense system, which we know did happen. So perhaps the foreign minister himself just isn't that good a father. I don't know, or it's possible.
It's awfully flip, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? I mean, maybe buy your kids a Slinky. It's a wonderful toy, but this isn't really all that important. What I really want to say about this is that I think future generations of faculty at military academies and graduate schools of international relations will use this episode as proof of concept of the idea that it's possible to escalate in order to de-escalate, at least on a tactical level. That is, by employing a small escalation, you can achieve a broader de-escalation.
So who did the small escalation?
That was Israel.
Striking at very near nuclear facilities or perhaps at actual nuclear facilities in Iran?
Yes, but they didn't use a whole lot of weapons and they didn't do a whole lot of damage.
So it was escalation in the preciousness of the target, but it was de-escalation in the limited nature, the limited scope of the strike?
Exactly. And as you'll recall, in last week's episode, previously on Working for Crusoe, that Joe Biden had asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to take the win. And I think Israel essentially said, okay, we'll take the win, but we want to put a couple more points up on the board first. And so that's sort of a compromise.
They went for two, Sam.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, well, not exactly, metaphorically, that is. But another thing about the de-escalation is that I'm, as you know, John, generally disinclined to agree with Benjamin Netanyahu about much of anything. But one thing that he constantly says that I do agree with is that even though Iran is a Shia Muslim theocracy and Hamas is a Sunni Muslim militant group, ideologically, at least as concerns Israel, they're basically the same, right? They both intend to wipe out the nation of Israel. And I think this is very true, right? They say it all the time. It's in the Hamas charter. The supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, says death to Israel just about every Friday sermon. The only reason death to Israel is not their number one national slogan is that designation will always be held by death to America.
The great Satan.
Exactly. So if you can escalate in order to de-escalate with Iran, and by de-escalating, gain what everybody says is a tactical win for your side, why can't you do it with Hamas? Now,
that is a great question, Sam. Is it because he's appeasing a hard right element of his government that are borderline insane zealots?
It might be, but the point and you know what, there might be a reason. There might be other differences between Hamas and Iran that I'm not factoring into this analysis.
No, but this is a very legitimate point.
Yeah, the point that I want to make is if you can do so with Iran and you can't do it with Hamas, it's not because of their murderous ideology, which is identical to that of Iran. It must be for some other reason, which I don't necessarily know what that reason is, but it's not an ideological identity between Iran and Hamas.
It's a fascinating point, and perhaps a damning one, or another damning one for the Netanyahu government in their prosecution of the war in Gaza.
Yes, but I would like to repeat that this is only a tactical de-escalation. This is not a strategic outcome, right? The broad strategy of Israel remains the same. We know that they're preparing for the assault on Rafah. They've made very visible military and other moves that indicate that the assault on Rafah is due imminently. I would imagine by the time we record next week's episode, it will have begun. I'd be surprised if it would not have by that time.
But just for the world, if not for Gaza, this is a net positive that it appears Iran and Israel are not careening towards all-out war.
Absolutely. We'd have to say it's definitely a net positive.
Yeah. Shall we move to China?
I think so, yes. I mean, we'll have occasion to return to the Middle East in many future episodes, I'm confident, so we need not belabor it today.
Did Antony Blinken draw the short straw? I mean, I guess it's his gig to go overseas and talk to other countries.
He is the Secretary of State.
Right,
yes.
That's the gig. But he's going there right as the Biden administration is talking about tariffs on Chinese steel and solar panels and other products. They're talking about forcing the company that owns TikTok to sell, right? Like there's a lot of stick happening towards China in the Biden administration, and Blinken's got to go over there and play nice right now. Go to basketball games.
You missed the most important one, which is that they've also just passed military aid to Taiwan, right?
Right. Well, that's part of the $95 billion package, right? Of course.
Absolutely, right? That's actually much more important than the steel or the...
Here you go, Anthony. Enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is...
Make lots of friends.
It's not like, he just called up Wang Yi and said, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Right? I mean, these things are scheduled far ahead.
Are you around?
Time, right? Yeah, so he couldn't, it's not like he can.
Well, but then maybe, I guess Congress had dragged their feet. So the United States was then forced to pass this in a maybe not ideal timing for the visit.
Yeah, and I don't think they were actually, we better not do this because Secretary Blinken's on his way. I don't think it even occurred to anybody.
The aid was too important and too far delayed.
But yeah, that is the gig, right? You never know what's going to happen before, right before you make your trip. That's just part of the deal.
What else should we know? I mean, he's there, and that's diplomacy. That's different when Yellen goes over there. It's different when the Commerce Secretary goes over there.
Yes.
I guess it's just good. There's just more general engagement with China. Right.
Exactly. And as much as we have good reason to feel like we're now on a Cold War footing with China, and a very important difference between what's going on today and the actual Cold War from decades ago.
Cold War classic.
Yeah, exactly. In those days, there was nowhere near this level of diplomatic engagement between the the United States and the Soviet Union. Not even close, right? So, just keep those cards and letters coming, basically, right? Just make sure there's, for example, when Janet Yellen was in China just a few weeks ago, as we discussed on this show, one of the takeaways from that was that the United States and China established an economic Trans-Pacific working group below the cabinet level, right, where Yellen's people and the Chinese economic staff would sort of communicate on a regular basis about what was going on. Now, I don't know what the substance of these communications is. It might not be all that substantive at all, frankly. But the point is that they're just keeping the lines of communication open. And one thing I found interesting about Blinken's visit this week is that many Western outlets news outlets, that is, seem to believe that it didn't go very well at all, right? Whereas the Global Times, Chinese Communist Party English language news website, they thought it was okay. They didn't think it was fantastic. They didn't hate it, right? But they're not at all shy about bashing the United States very openly if they feel that the party wants them to do so. Absolutely, that's their boss, obviously, right? So there seems to be some difference of opinion. Unfortunately, I'm not able to find out what the domestic Mandarin or other Chinese language outlets might have said about this. So if any of our listeners and or viewers can speak Mandarin or in some other way find out what the sort of coverage of this meeting was like amongst in the Chinese domestic media, I'd be very interested to find out. But for instance, Blinken said to the Chinese that they were providing what are called dual use components to Russia that Russia can use to build weapon systems in their war against Ukraine. And the United States would, of course, much prefer that China not do such things. And again, according to several Western news outlets, the Chinese response was, this is hypocritical. You're arming Ukraine, right? And of course, the aid to Ukraine had just passed. But I thought that was interesting because China didn't say, oh, no, we're not. They seemed to acknowledge that, yes, they were in some indirect way supporting the Russian war effort. It wasn't, we're innocent of this. It's you're just as bad, right? And that's not the same thing.
No, it's a subtle but important difference.
Exactly. So, but again, the broader point is that the dialogue continues and everybody seems to understand that it's in the interests of both nations that the dialogue should continue.
You also sent me an article after we decided to talk about Blinken and China, about how China had multilateral meetings with various navies, including but not limited to the United States and the Russian Navy.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating.
I thought it was fascinating, too. I think they talked about, I mean, look, the Chinese talked tough and said, oh, the United States and Japan are engaged in a destabilizing alliance, right? Because China feels like they're trying to be contained, because we are trying to contain China.
Yes,
they're aggressive. That's what happens when you're a belligerent or authoritarian state. But I thought back to the balloon incident, Balloon Gate. Remember?
Oh, God.
When,
yes, of course.
When Austin, the Secretary of Defense, called his counterparts in the Chinese government,
and nobody picked up the phone.
And it went to voicemail, right? Like, we had the hotline installed with the Soviet Union after the Cuban Missile Crisis to make sure that everybody knew what was happening and there were no unintended consequences or, limiting the risk of that. So just the fact that China was meeting with so many different navies, I thought was good. Now, again, I don't know if Austin can get on the phone and not get voicemail yet. Like, I don't.
No, supposedly you can. Supposedly he can.
Okay, good. But like, there's no official hotline. Maybe I can't definitively say whether there is. I mean, look, communication's a lot different. Yeah, communication's a lot different
to
now.
Improve it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But again, I just think about, when Pelosi went to Taiwan in 2022, like, China kind of ghosted us. And I've read Barbara Tuchman, The Guns of August, right? Like, that's what we're all afraid of. You don't want things to get their own momentum and people make decisions in a vacuum. And all of a sudden you've got the Great War. So
yes,
just that they were having those conversations seemed positive to me.
Well, not only that, but another difference I would say is that leading up to the First World War, all the combatant powers, or what would end up being the combatant powers, they thought that they were all going to win, right? Everybody on each side was like, we're just going to kick their ass, right? Nobody thinks that now, right? Everybody understands that if it actually came down to a war, it would just be terrible. Right.
The stakes would be catastrophically high.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I think why there's so much of this sort of activity going on, is that this would be the worst possible outcome. That doesn't mean it's still not going to happen necessarily, right? But everybody, I think, because of the example of the First World War, is very alive to the danger and at least trying to do what they can to forestall it.
I mean, we would like to think the lessons of the 20th century had kind of reduced the adventurism amongst great power warmongering. And that's probably why Putin's invasion of Ukraine is so shocking, because it's such a throwback, right?
Yes, that's right. People thought that this sort of thing was over with.
We all kind of had agreed this was a terrible idea.
Yeah, but it turns out that we were all being rather naive about that.
Well, that's a nice segue into the aid package, right?
Yes.
So Lloyd Austin announced, that's the United States Defense Secretary, announced today $6 billion long-term military aid package for Ukraine. That's part of the larger $95 billion package that had been passed finally by both houses of
fully
Congress.
$60 billion of which is for Ukraine. This is only the first.
This is the
installment of the aid to Ukraine.
It is the largest aid morsel, for lack of a better term, to date. It allowed the United States to purchase new equipment produced by the American defense industry for the Ukrainian military. This is a critical talking point that I feel as though people in the United States who support arming the Ukrainians are not hammering home. This is not charity. This is amazing for U.S. defense contractors. This is tremendous business for United States defense contractors. This is not an economic loss.
I agree with that. I think, however, you might want to be a little sensitive about saying, well, selling weapons is great business. It's American jobs, I'll
tell you what, but the kind of people in the United States who are criticizing these policies are the kind of psychopaths that would like that. Maybe.
I'm not so certain about that. I think a lot of them would just be against arming Ukraine under any circumstances. Okay. I don't think that. I think the overlap there is and might not be as large as you seem to think it is.
Okay, fine. That's fair. I feel like there's a MAGA resistance to the Ukrainian concern, and I feel like enough of those people are kind of bloodthirsty enough that they'd be like, "Oh, it's helping Americans build better weapons and make money off guns."
I guess, but
yeah, maybe I'm oversimplifying.
I think so too.
I'll take that. Yeah.
I know we've discussed on this show before how people support Vladimir Putin for reasons that might shock and horrify us, right? That sort of ideological allegiance, I think, might trump, if you pardon the expression, the desire for additional American jobs. I don't think there's enough good opinion polling about these sorts of issues to be able to say whether it does or not, but I think it's at least possible.
Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, spoke after the Congress, both houses of Congress passed the aid package. He said it was vital aid for Ukraine and, quote, "This vote reinforces America's role as a beacon of democracy and leader of the free world," which is our job. So, yes, it's a tragedy. It took so long, but it is nice to see there is the political will in this country to do the right thing.
It should have never taken this long. I would say, however, that I misjudged Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. I've said on this show that I didn't think he would actually defy the far right wing of his own party, of which he's actually a member, by the way. Right?
Do you think he had a come to Jesus moment, like literally because he's a Christian guy and he might have an understanding of the duty involved?
I think that it's a combination of factors. He says that getting intelligence briefings that are his due as Speaker of the House helped change his mind.
Right. I heard that too. Yeah.
One thing that I heard reported on the PBS NewsHour was that he was able to meet or at least have phone calls with Ukrainian evangelical Christians who had lived under Russian occupation and had their churches destroyed by Russian occupiers. And of course, Johnson is himself an evangelical Christian. This is the kind of thing that's really going to sway him. I think another important factor here also was that Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, didn't really weigh in on this issue at all. He didn't say, no, we shouldn't arm Ukraine. Now, he's on trial and was already on trial at the time that these votes were happening. So he might have been busy with other things. And of course, the trials are all about him. And as we all know, Donald Trump's favorite thing to talk about is himself. So foreign aid, it's not about me. I don't even care. Right. And so he didn't stand in Johnson's way. I think that was his silence on that issue, I think, was also a very important factor here. However, I should also say that no sooner had the aid package passed the House of Representatives than Mike Johnson started saying things that I found extremely objectionable. So there's no danger of me going out and joining the Mike Johnson fan club. I was just wrong about him on this one not small thing, but only one thing.
The bill passed the Senate 79 to 18. It's actually 4 bills. So $61 billion for Ukraine, $26 billion for Israel, and humanitarian aid for civilians in conflict zones around the world. $8.1 billion to, quote, counter-communist China in the Indo-Pacific. With regard to Ukraine, they're getting vehicles, Stinger air defense munitions, high mobility artillery rocket systems, 155 millimeter artillery ammunition, and anti-tank munitions. A lot of stuff that goes boom.
Absolutely. And by the way, as far as the humanitarian aid goes to other places, those places include Haiti, for example.
Oh, right, which we talked about.
The Prime Minister Ariel Henry also resigned this week to make way for the Transitional Constitutional Council, which has been sworn in. And so this by itself was not going to come anywhere near solving the crisis in Haiti. But the humanitarian aid will certainly help. And we know that there is at least a political transition underway. So we might hope that eventually there'll be some improvement there. The aid package also included aid for Sudan. And so that, again, was much later than it should have been. But that is the most serious humanitarian crisis occurring in the world today. So I'm glad that some of the money went to them also.
is this a $26 billion blank check for Israel, or does this come with some strings attached to you reckon?
I say blank check. I mean, Israel doesn't really, once they get the weapons, no one's going to tell them what to do with them.
Right.
And so that I find distressing, frankly. But we'll have to see how Rafah turns out and hope that, for instance, we know that as we said, Joe Biden said take the win, and Israel settled for just going for the 2-point conversion instead of retaliating in a massive way. We know that some of the members of their war cabinet wanted a much faster and much larger retaliation against Iran. And so if they refrain from engaging in such a retaliation as a result of United States pressure, that's a good thing. They might, however, just have done it purely out of their own interest. It's not actually a good idea to have a full-on shooting war with Iran. So I hesitate before I attribute their sort of a forbearance to U.S. pressure. It might have just been something that they decided to do on their own.
Anything else about the aid package you want to touch on, or can we pivot to the UAW?
Sure. That's, it's nice to have
your favorite guy.
Well, I mean, I'm very fond of President Sean Fain, as you know.
Yeah. Okay. Hourly workers, this is CNN's reporting, hourly workers at Volkswagen's plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, overwhelmingly voted to join the United Auto Workers late Friday, that is a week ago, a major breakthrough in the union's effort to organize workers at plants nationwide. And I will point out specifically in the South, where people like Toyota, companies like Toyota and Volkswagen and others build cars that we think of as foreign brands, but they use American labor. It's not unionized. Whereas the big three up north obviously have their contracts with the United Auto Workers. So this is kind of a regional plot twist in organized labor.
Exactly. And that, in fact, well, for instance, Sean Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, became president in March of last year. He's
had a great year.
Yeah, he was the first such president to be elected directly by the UAW membership. So just upon taking office, he was already a historic figure in the union. He then went on later last year to mount a phenomenally successful strike against all three of the major American auto manufacturers.
Simultaneously.
And that was the first time the UAW had done so. That they traditionally would only strike against one at a time. This is, I think, and as we discussed when this was happening, I thought this was just a genius strategic move. And I couldn't believe that the UAW had never done it before. So that was also a historic success. And now this is the first time, as you say, that a non-union foreign auto manufacturer plant has voted to join the UAW. So in just over 13 months, Sean Fain has become one of the most monumentally successful leaders in the history of the UAW. And it's surprising to me that this story hasn't gotten more coverage. For example, obviously, the United Auto Workers, it's not as important as the White House or Congress but for instance, every television network has a healthcare correspondent, right? And we can basically, we see the same person reporting on healthcare every time that comes up. Right?
Yeah, where's the labor correspondent?
Right. They don't have one, right? They just sort of shake loose some sort of, junior level, not maybe junior, but kind of mid-level correspondent.
Not senior.
From the national beat to report on this. But every single one of them that I've seen has used the exact same 4-word phrase. And that phrase is, this is a big deal. And it's true. All right. I mean, we're just so used to not having union power in the news that they just have to shake someone loose from some other beat to cover this. I think
it's been a long 50 years of decline of American organized labor.
I think that might start to change, though. If the UAW and other unions, for example, the actors and writers unions here in Los Angeles last year, if all these people continue to have successful labor actions, I think we might start to see some more news coverage. For example, as we recall, President Biden stood on the picket line with the UAW back in the fall when they were striking. And he was, again, historically the first American president to do so. This week, President Biden also got the endorsement of the North American Building Trades Union, which I believe is actually a slightly larger union than the UAW, which you might expect, right? I mean, but not only that, they got the president of that union, Sean McGarvey, to do a full-on commercial, which will probably be mostly online, saying that President Trump had promised him to secure pension benefits for the NABTU, which I don't think is actually referred to as NAB2, unfortunately. And then he said, President Trump did not keep his promise to me. And he should not ever be president again. And so hopefully this might have some impact on the election in the fall. But one thing I would say is that when Trump was first elected, many of his supporters, and I think for good reason, felt that they had been left behind by the American economy. And I think it's important to understand that other people can speak to people like that, right? And it doesn't maybe, I think Biden does a pretty good job, but if he can enlist people like President McGarvey and President Fain to help him out, that will probably sort of be of some assistance to him. I kind of wish that he would get the endorsement of some union whose president is not named Sean, but right. We'll have to take that. That's not.
There's got to be. What's the big hospitality one in Nevada, Las Vegas?
You tell me. You live in Nevada.
I know. It's the big hospitality one.
I don't honestly.
I don't think their president's named Sean.
Probably not. No.
Yeah. Just to finish up the thought about the vote for the Chattanooga, Tennessee Volkswagen plant, 73% of the 3,600 workers at the plant who cast ballots had voted in favor of joining the union. So 73%.
Almost voted. 3-1.
Yeah. And turnout was 84% among eligible voters. This was a landslide.
I don't think the UAW even thought it would be that high. And we'll have occasion to return to this topic at the end of next month, or maybe the middle of the month, because workers at the Mercedes plant in Alabama,
another Southern foreign,
will also be staging a vote on whether they want to join the UAW. Now, I think that this sort of labor action is such an uncommon phenomenon in our current national life.
I can't recall anything like it in my lifetime.
No, and that it's difficult for me to say what the impact of the vote in Tennessee is going to be on the vote in Alabama, but it can't hurt. I mean, it really just can't. It's interesting also that when the UAW settled their strike with the Big Three last year, immediately every foreign non-union auto manufacturer doled out substantial pay raises to their employees because they got scared of just this sort of thing happening. I think Volkswagen's pay raises at that point were the lowest. They raised their pay for their workers by, I believe it was 11%, which was quite a bit less than half of what the UAW workers got. They might, I think, today wish they'd forked out a little bit more money. But at the same time, when your workers are voting 3-1, right, they probably wouldn't have helped. Maybe they did the right thing, actually, by only forking out a small raise because they were obviously going to lose the vote anyway.
And Sam, you and I like wordplay. You speak German. Volkswagen is the people's car, right?
Volkswagen, yes.
The people's car.
That's right. That's what it means.
So there you go. It's long overdue, right?
Yes, but Mercedes is not.
Right. Also, we were kind of recounting Sean Fain and the UAW's unionization kind of victories. Didn't they also unionize Mack Truck after the Big Three?
I'm not sure if
there was some action there.
I think they had a successful strike at Mack also. I think Mack was already in the union. I don't think they joined. But yeah, they also apparently there's a sanitation company called Aramark whose workers are also part of the UAW for some reason that I don't understand. But they earlier this week or perhaps last week also secured record wage gains in their contract negotiations. So there's lots of these things happening all the time. But again, there's nobody on the beat on this in the media, and there ought to be.
Well, Sam, I called a 155 millimeter artillery ammunition milliliter. That tells you how much I'm ready for my post-game beer. So I think I'm going to call this episode.
Well, like someone once said, I like beer.
Yeah. Who you didn't go to college with.
No, I did not go to college with.
All right. Keep those cards and letters coming. JohnRameyMedia@gmail.com. Sam, do we have any previews for next week? I guess we'll have some spicy labor updates, and
I'm sure something will happen in the Middle East, but we'll have to see. There's nothing that I can think of that I know is going to happen, but I'm sure something will.
Okay. He is Sam Park in Los Angeles. I am John Ramey in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Thanks for being with us for this episode of Working for Crusoe. We will talk to you next Friday. Have a great weekend.
Folks.